In the far northwest of England lies the sleepy village of Dakar, which in the past seemed to be a place of great spiritual importance, as a valuable relic of St. Cuthbert's hair was kept there, and also the location was mentioned by the Venerable Bede in his Ecclesiastical History of the English People. Within the village of Dakar lies a church of Norman design, believed to have been built in the 13th century. Typical of many churches seen around Cumbria and the north of England, it is also a sanctuary for a Crusader knight, whose monument is carved out of local red sandstone and lies in the north wall of the church. During excavations of the church, Vikings artefacts have been found, but the most remarkable of all objects discovered at the site of the Dakar church are 4 strange carvings known as the Dakar bears. Looking somewhat similar to a lion or a griffin, with human feet and something of a serpent's head on them. The design is both unique and mysterious, as there is no record of what they actually are or how they arrived at the site. Most likely they were excavated during the construction of the early church, which was probably itself laid upon a pre-Christian pagan's foundation. And what makes the Dakar idols even more interesting is they bear a similar style of artwork to pagan sculpture found in places such as Boa Island in County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland. The new religion from the Middle East always capitalised upon the magic of the pagan past. Although we hear much about various saints destroying pagan sites, such as destructions of sacred oaks, groves and so on, what the church's history never tells us, did this destruction of pagan sanctuaries backlash and somehow affect or destroy the various saints or bishops who embarked upon the destruction of these locations? It would not be in the interest of the church to fill their archives with such painful realities, but there's no doubt that the church kept the sorceries of the pagan era in the form of shrines, holy wells, and other places of veneration, such as grottos, in order to transport or transition the magic of the pagans into the Christian world. The 4 bears at Dakar give testament to this, that Christianity, in its early days, up until at least the time of the Swedish Crusades, had magic and sorcery central to their rites. In Keith Thomas's monumental tome, Religion and the Decline of Magic, the author sets out the transitional period between pagan mysticism and Christian mysticism, demonstrating that sorcery was an integral part of the early church and remained so right up until the Reformation. In England in particular, witchcraft, astrology and every kind of popular sorcery flourished up until the 16th and even 17th centuries. At this time, men began to reach for scientific explanation with the oncoming Protestant Reformation and the later Enlightenment. in a specific and intensive desire to remove magic from the popular consciousness, and in particular religion. Practically every religion at its core is seen by its followers as a mechanism for attaining supernatural or magical powers. At the same time, it does not prevent it from functioning as a system of moral code, and is also a symbol of social order, a route to immortality and the absolution of sins. And along with this, the ability for man to control elements of his earthly existence by means of the supernatural. Early Christianity, in particular, is saturated with the concept of conjurations, spells, and invocations. The early church, under the missionaries, were not only converted by means of salvation and absolution from original sin, but also by magic performed by early bishops and evangelical missions. It must be remembered that the Hebrew priest of the Old Testament bedazzled the followers of Baal by challenging them to publicly perform supernatural acts, and the same happened with the apostles of the early emerging Christian church. Miracles and supernatural cures were a central part of converting and gaining adherents. The New Testament is filled with stressing the importance of these activities in the work of conversion, and the ability to perform miracles became an indispensable test of the sanctity and devotion of the missionaries. Among the Anglo-Saxon Church, the claim and belief in supernatural power was an essential element to fight against paganism, and Christian missionaries constantly stressed the power of Christian charms and talismans as being superior to pagan and Nordic magical charms. By the time the medieval period came around, the Christian church found itself caught in the tradition of having working miracles as well as preaching the Gospels. Even as late as the 12th and 13th century, the lives of saints had assumed a stereotypical pattern, all about supernatural achievements of holy men, and stressed how they could tell the future and other prophecies, control the weather by means of auguries, and provide protection against diseases, fire, and even earthquakes. The transportation of heavy objects by means of Christian magic was also a celebrated element of Christian missionary history. Many of these tales are told in a book called The Golden Legend, a compilation made in the 13th century by the Archbishop of Genoa, and which was translated into English and found its way all over Europe as an inspirational book in celebrating the magical and supernatural powers of Christian missionaries. Even before the Reformation, the Church, as an institution, reaped rewards, prestige, and even financial accumulations from their miraculous ability to perform miracles, supernatural acts, and so on. In order to avoid blasphemies, it was constantly stressed that the saints and the missionaries who performed these miracles were only operating on behalf of God's supernatural power and did not themselves have any magical power as such. There were shrines of saints at Glastonbury, Lindisfarne, Canterbury and Westminster, and many other holy places of pilgrimage from which the sick and the dying would visit, holy wells in particular. Almost 1,000 miracles were associated with Becket and his shrine at the Holy Rood in Bromholm in Norfolk. At one point it was claimed that 29 persons were raised from the dead and 12 cured of blindness. Holy relics became talismans and believed to have the power to cure illness and to protect against dangers. In 1426, the Bishop of Durham, among his accounts, contained a payment for signing 16 cattle with St. Winifred's signet to ward off disease. Likewise, a return of iconography happened, and images were credited with miraculous powers. The representation of St. Christopher was so frequently adorned on the walls of English village churches, it was said to offer a day's preservation from illness or death to all who looked upon it. During Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries, he found 500 or 600 worshippers at a shrine one day when he went to pull it down. Hence the power and supernatural abilities that was infused within these locations and objects right up until the Protestant Reformation. Worship and veneration of saints and their deeds even became a fabric of supernatural and magical consideration within medieval society. All individuals had their own patron saint, just as pagan churches had their own god or goddess, with strong territorial associations with an almost totemic character. The magic of one parish, due to that of the reputation of a saint or missionary, was guarded and preserved, almost as if a magical circle of sorts. Within the town of Ipswich, the Virgin Mary was considered something similar to the goddess Hecate of the pagan classical world. The cure of specific diseases would be assigned to appropriate saints and the parishes of various churches in their names, depending on the specific nature of the saint and the parish and the kind of miracles they were expected to work. Pregnant women could go there and use holy relics, girdles, skirts and coats, kept for the purpose of many religious houses, and were urged by midwives to call upon St. Margaret or the Virgin Mary to reduce their pains of labour, or to invoke St. Felicius if they wished to ensure a new child would be a boy. Henry VII's Queen paid 6 shillings and 8 pennies to a monk for the girdle of Our Lady for use in childbirth. However, by the 15th century, the worship of the magical powers of saints and their relics had waned considerably. As late as 1538, a Sussex parson was still advising his parishioners how to cure their sick animals by making offerings to Saint Anthony. This is a direct conduit back to the sacrificial offerings of the pagan temples and demonstrated the endurance of paganism, and with that, concepts of magic and sorcery connected to paganism right into the late medieval church. On April 2nd in the year 999, Sylvester II became the first ever French Pope, and with this assumed charge of the most powerful political and religious position on earth. His selection took place at a time before cardinals elected popes. Therefore, his appointment came about as a result of the then usual method of power plays between a select number of European noble families at the time. Although there was little debate concerning Sylvester II's qualifications, as he was universally recognized as one of the great intellectuals and teachers of the age, the reason for this selection may have been more interesting than his piety or his political and economic opportunities which he could offer his sponsors. Renowned and respected as a brilliant scholar, adept at both Arabic and classical mathematics and astronomy, he had also brought the abacus, as well as the armillary spear, a complex visual aid designed for instruction in mathematics and astronomy, back into European education and science. Sylvester II is even credited with bringing the decimal number system to the West. As impressive as Sylvester II's curriculum vitae was, he possessed another talent which the Vatican, along with his powerful supporters, had hushed up by the time he was on the papal throne. Pope Sylvester II was once a powerful magician named Gerbert, who spent many years deeply immersed within the occult world and sorcery of the Iberian and Moorish magical traditions. Born in 946 in the French town of Ballarat, Gerbert soon developed a passion for mathematics and astronomy. He was also fascinated by the Spanish Muslims he witnessed as a boy, as well as taking a deep interest in their customs and traditions. Later, while he was studying astrology in the Islamic-controlled cities of Cordoba and Seville, Gerbert began his career as a sorcerer. This was the result of a magical text said to have arrived in Spain from the Arab world via an Islamic magi that came into Gerbert's possession. When the Arab magician discovered that the future Pope Sylvester had stolen his book of spells, he went in pursuit of the young Gerbert, who, much like the Druids of Ireland hundreds of years previously, while avoiding St. Patrick, turned invisible, so not as to be located by the incensed Arab. As his study into the occult deepened, Gerbert's reputation as a magician also deepened, in tandem with each magical text that came into his possession. A legend soon arose that he had constructed a bronze mechanical head which contained a female demon by the name of Merdiniana, and which could answer questions put to it. The answers were either yes or no. According to later Protestant biographers, it was Gerbert's satanic pact with this demonic female automaton head which allowed him to eventually become pope. There is probably more than a grain of truth to this at some level. However, soon things got well out of hand when legend maintains Gerbert was killed while at the head of the papal throne by a demon who was said to have gouged out his eyeballs and dismembered him on the altar. However, the records do not actually specify what kind of altar. Following his death, a custom eventually took root that his bones inside Gerbert's tomb were capable of afterlife communication by rattling against the side of his stone coffin. One rattle for yes, two rattles for no. Like his demonically controlled bronze robot head, it is something of a binary code of interdimensional communications, and it was by no means unique. This stone cross is one of two which appear on the surface to be Christian. They are in fact pagan, from the Druid period of Ireland, celebrating the last pagan god of Ireland, the Crom Cruach. Located in a desolate churchyard in County Mayo, the two crosses have stood the test of time and give testimony to the transitional nature of the magic of the pagan world being adopted and incorporated into the magic of the Christian world, the charge being continued on. While the church itself practiced magic and sorcery as part of their miracle workings, strict prohibitions upon the laity in terms of the performance of magic and witchcraft, particularly in relationship to healing or cures, was punishable with severe penalties right up to that of death. Worship of Christian saints, their parishes, and their holy relics is one of the reasons why pre-Christian megalithic and other sites in England and Scotland remained untouched, being something of an ancestral respect for the supernatural powers of certain locations. A great many Christian sites being built upon pagan places of worship as something of a magical infrastructure travelling along in tandem with the reconfiguration of the physical and environmental infrastructure of the holy place. With the onset of the Reformation, the association with Christianity and the supernatural, and in particular the practice of magic, changed drastically. Within the Presbyterian world, such practices were deemed idolatry and blasphemous. But these effects were also to take place within Catholicism, as something of an unofficial split took place between mainstream officialdom of Catholicism, represented by the Vatican, and then by the laity, who continued to practice something of a folk Catholicism, which takes place in many parts of this world, even to this day, and is represented by everything from Santeria and Santa Muerte cults, even the Black Madonnas of Southern Europe. This is the Market Church in Hanover, Germany, and is considered one of the central spiritual locations of the Protestant Reformation, that being the moving away from Catholic or papal idolatry, which the Presbyterians and particularly the Lutherans considered to be pagan and in no way Christian. And yet, with even all this, a denial of the sorceries of the pagan past, the Market Church in Hanover is adorned with the magical symbols, including a gigantic inverted pentacle. Even among the Lutherans, the fear of magic and witches was so deep that it led to magical symbols of the pagans and the witches adorning some of their most important churches. Born in 1483, Martin Luther was the son of a wealthy Catholic family who in time became disillusioned with the faith. Not only was Martin Luther the founder of the Protestant faith, he was also a drunkard and a Jew-hating bigot obsessed with witches and his own personal war with devils, whom he claimed was represented on earth by the emissaries of hell. These devils could destroy crops, cure diseases and create storms. Despising just about anyone who wasn't a German Protestant, Luther, who also believed that there was no such thing as free will and that all humans were at the mercy of predestination, in that only the will of either God or the devil determines the life choices and behaviours of all humans. Essentially, within Lutheranism, God is good, but he allows the devil to exist within a dualistic framework to weed out the unworthy or lesser humans. Hence, the devil is the servant of God, and therefore necessary. In a cultural sense, Luther believed that all his own personal diseases and his many other ailments, including his alcoholism, which plagued him during his lifetime, came as a direct result of demons attacking him personally. Psychologically, this is fascinating, of course, as it possibly indicates that Luther may have been tormented by the idea that he had a pagan inside him, or perhaps unable to break free from his Catholic past, and which all needed to be exorcised out. And this is why, for all its vilification of pagan idolatry, Catholicism and witches, Martin Luther created a church that dabbled as much in supernatural sorceries and magic in a desperate attempt to try and escape from them. Christianity has never been able to escape the pagan magic which it encountered in the early days of its infiltration into Europe, and considering the numbers of Christian mystics, mediums, and other workers of sorceries who call themselves Christians, it is likely to never change. There is a need within human beings to believe that the supernatural exists, and that somehow, by means of magic or even folk witchcraft, we can even up the odds between ourselves and the natural world. Even the iconoclasts who smashed through the faces of the Greek and Roman gods when Christianity first came to political prominence back in the 3rd and 4th century AD are still fighting the occult to this day.